Hello, and welcome to the 4th of July edition of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp podcast. I am your host, Eric Herlock, and on today's show, we talk to author Jen Hobbs about her new book called American Hemp, which has been called a fascinating manifesto on the economic, environmental, and health benefits of the hemp industry. We'll have a quick word from our sponsor, and then we'll get right into the interview with Jen Hobbs.
Industrial hemp.
This episode of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp podcast is brought to you in part by the National Hemp Association. The National Hemp Association is a nonprofit organization committed to the growth and development of all aspects of the hemp industry. Learn how the National Hemp Association can help your hemp operation. Become a member today at nationalhempassociation.org. National Hemp Association, pushing progress. Jen Hobbs, welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp podcast.
Thank you, Eric.
First of all, let me congratulate you on your book, American Hemp, How Growing Our Newest Cash Crop Can Improve Our Health, Clean Our Environment, and Slow Climate Change. This book is very well written and researched with extensive footnotes backing up the facts. It's entertaining and informative. Your attitude and sense of humor shine through, as does your sense of urgency and frustration with the government and industry. Anyway, welcome to the show. Could you introduce yourself and tell us why you were compelled to write this book?
Sure. Yes, thanks for having me. So as far as my interest with hemp is concerned, it really started when I was researching my previous book that I co-wrote with the former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. That book was Jesse Ventura's Marijuana Manifesto. And although we focused on marijuana, for the majority of the book, we had a couple chapters in there about hemp. And through doing that research and really getting in depth into all the different attributes of the plant and just, all of the different values that it has, I really started to realize that, that just doing a chapter or two on the plant wasn't going to cover it. So that's really what inspired me to write this book, American Hemp.
Okay.
And then as far as, my personal experience with cannabis, my husband's a medical marijuana patient. So, I have a strong advocacy towards just legalization in general.
Okay. All right, so the first part of your book goes into the differences between hemp and marijuana. Then you get into the history of hemp around the world and in the U.S., and why it was made illegal in the first place. Then it had sort of a brief reemergence during World War II, but the hemp industry didn't survive after the war. Can you explain why it didn't?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think most people know about, the Hemp for Victory program in, during the 1940s for World War II. We had our supply chain was cut off due to the war, and we needed hemp for everything from parachute cords to uniforms. The government through the USDA set up a program to allow farmers to grow it. And they basically gave them, instructions, everything that they knew as far as the growing period and so on and so forth. And newspapers at the time really picked up on it. And, they were all saying, hey, this could be a great way to really boost the American economy after the war, give farmers an additional crop in the rotation. And a lot of those articles, and I do mention some of them in the book and I quote from them,
Mm-hmm.
You read them and it's like exactly what people are writing about today. And it's like we've gone in this full circle. But what essentially happened was because of the way that we, set up all this program for the war. Once the war was over, the program was dissolved, the funding was dissolved, and the only people that really could grow it were people that had their own farms, and they weren't relying on any government assistance for the machines and for all the factories that were produced. And I also mentioned in the book, hearings in the Senate where, farmers were saying, hey, we want to continue to grow this. Why are we now being taxed obscenely to grow it? When you all know that the value of it, it just helped us win a war. And, eventually Congress got around to, taking off those taxes. And, but by the time they did it, it really couldn't compete with all the synthetic fibers and of the time because they were just so much cheaper to make, out of petroleum, obviously. So, all those rayon and stretchy fabric.
Right.
So, we're coming full circle. There's industries now that are seeing the benefit of adding it to what they already produce.
Right.
It's like every article you read, it just the numbers keep going up and up with how big this industry can potentially get.
Right. You say in the book, and I'm going to quote here, hemp is a disruptor. It mocks modern ingenuity. And the more we research it, the more we find it offers yet another way to improve modern industry. So can you talk a little bit about the ways hemp might disrupt industry in America and specifically big agriculture in America?
Sure. So, that's always kind of been the way hemp's viewed just in general. It can create all these jobs and it can, do all these things better and more environmentally, it just has less of an environmental impact and so on and so forth. And, it does usually it does sound like, we're replacing industry. But now obviously we can incorporate, we found that we can actually incorporate it. But as far as the agricultural industry is concerned, we use all of these different chemicals on our crops, pesticides. I'm sure a lot of people know about, the Monsanto trials and everything that happened with Roundup. And I talk about that in the book. And, all of these emails that were released through the trial, through the Freedom of Information Act that shows, that the products actually are toxic. And that they are actual human carcinogens, and we're putting this on our food. So it's the benefit of growing hemp really is that it provides another way to grow crops without the use of pesticides. And a lot of people are, a lot of farmers that are doing organic farming are kind of taking note of that because, the plant does repel a lot of pests. They don't like it. And it also attracts a lot of pollinators like bees. So although, bees don't make honey out of hemp, obviously they do out of other plants. So if you're, putting hemp in an area to attract the bees and keep them around, obviously because hemp has a different growing cycle than a lot of other crops, that just in turn helps your whole crop cycle as a whole, especially since a lot of, these pesticides actually kill off bee populations.
Right.
So, as far as just a whole eco-friendly, looking at it holistically, hemp does have a lot of benefits just to get us away from using these harmful chemicals.
Okay, so as I mentioned in the intro, the subtitle of your book is How Growing Our Newest Cash Crop Can Improve Our Health, Clean Our Environment, and Slow Climate Change. Let's take that first one there. How is or how can hemp improve our health? And you're not just talking about CBD as a medicine, but you mean as a food, right?
Yeah. A lot of people might not be aware of just the nutritional benefits of hemp. Obviously, CBD's been in the news constantly, but hemp itself, if you look at the seeds that are grown from the plant, that it does not contain CBD. Those seeds actually have a just a vast amount of nutritional benefits. They're actually considered a superfood. So you have, protein, vitamin E, you have potassium, just an overwhelming amount of different vitamins and minerals, including omega-3 and omega-6. And what they've actually found is, a very small amount of hemp, so about like 2 or 3 tablespoons, can equal the amount of omega-3 and omega-6 that you would get in a fillet of salmon.
Wow.
So, you don't actually need a lot of this to make a difference in your diet and in your just overall nutritional benefits. So, when you're only adding 2 or 3 tablespoons to, a smoothie or something like that, it's not really affecting the flavor or offsetting, anything that you're used to. It's just a great way to get that nutrition in. And, obviously, it's just very difficult to really get that type of nutrition so easily. And, when you'd obviously be eating a full meal,
right,
and then some to get that quantity.
And there's never any CBD or THC in the seeds, right?
Right, exactly. So when you grow hemp for nutritional purposes, you're growing usually it's a specific type of hemp, that's been grown for that benefit. But also, just in general, the CBD is never going to be located in the seeds. It's like concentrated in what you would consider to be a bud, what we call CBD flower.
Right.
And the seeds don't contain any CBD, any THC or anything like that. They're completely void of any sort of cannabinoids.
So you do have a great chapter on CBD, but you end the chapter with this sort of ominous statement. These edible products are only as safe as the ground from which they came, making the health of American soil the biggest threat when consuming CBD. But hemp can help the soil too, right?
Right.
Can you explain phyto remediation and where in the world they're putting it to use successfully?
Sure. So this is actually, for me, this is the most fascinating aspect of growing hemp. And, I would just love to write a book just on this particular topic, because it's something I feel like it should be covered more often. Essentially, the first time we really hear about it in the news from a wide range of outlets is in the late 1990s. When the blast happened over in Chernobyl, there were a bunch of scientific researchers that went over there and were trying to figure out if there's any way that they can extract the radiation and the toxic chemicals from the soil, so that it could potentially, be used again at some point within possibly our lifetimes or at some point sooner.
Sure.
And what they found was that hemp actually is one of the plants that will take out radiation from the soil. And they can also extract lead, copper, nickel, zinc, arsenic, mercury, a bunch of other contaminants and from the soil and from the groundwater. And there's been many other studies that look into hemp's ability to do this. And what's fascinating is that it's actually being used over in Italy right now to clean up agricultural land that's been affected by industrial pollution. So there was a steel mill in this one particular area in Italy, and it was one of the biggest in the country. And over time, it's spewing out all of this, all these different toxins, lead, and just all these different heavy metals that are produced, from producing steel.
Sure.
And it settled in the ground, and the cows ate it, and then the government came in and said, you can't, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to. Sell milk or any meat from this area because it has contaminated the animals. So the farmers turned around and, decided to grow hemp to try and alleviate the toxins from the soil, and that's what they've been doing. And they're estimated to be done doing that in the next couple of years, and hopefully, areas of that region can return to growing agriculture.
So, a question there on the hemp that's grown.
Mm-hmm.
Those plants are then full of these heavy metals and toxins. What do you do with that biomass?
Right. So that is the thing. When you grow hemp to take the toxins out of the soil, obviously you're not going to want to eat or consume that plant in any way. So what science has been trying to do is figure out, okay, what do we do now with this plant that's now filled with toxins? And there are a couple of different solutions that I list in the book. But obviously, there's incineration, but there's other ways of using it, using the parts of the plant where the chemicals are not concentrated,
Mm-hmm.
and using it for biomass, for biofuel.
Oh, okay.
So that's one of the ways, and I talk about some other ways that we can use the biomass for creating electricity and so on and so forth. But there are ways of doing it. There's even some areas of the world that use plants to mine for resources. So they'll take a plant that has this photo remediation ability, and they'll grow it in an area that has, gold, for instance, and then they'll be able to take the gold out of the plant. This is something, again, modern ingenuity. And we create this problem, and we have no idea how to solve it. And this plant that's, been by and large illegal has the solution.
It's amazing. Chapter 9 of your book is called "The EPA is Not Your Friend."
Right.
So without giving too much of your book away, can you explain why the EPA is not our friend and how that relates to hemp?
Well, I go through a wide range of just from when the EPA was founded all the way up to today, just to kind of show that it doesn't matter really what administration the EPA is under, they are not operating in our best interest. There's just too much collaboration with these companies, these chemical companies that they are supposed to be regulating. So a lot of the problems that we have, like these Superfund sites that are all over the United States, they're basically caused because EPA regulators are not going in there and not making sure that these companies are doing the right thing. So, I list all sorts of problems that we've had, from our lead epidemics, like Flint, Michigan, all the way to oil spills and the chemicals that are used to clean up oil spills that actually destroy the entire ecosystem
the dispersants.
While they're doing that. Yeah, and it's just basically due to this strange relationship between the EPA and these businesses, again, that they're supposed to be regulating. They bend over backwards for them. It's also a problem, obviously, with lobbying with Congress. If the EPA does crack down on a particular corporation, the corporation's just going to turn around and go to Congress and say, hey, I gave you guys all this money. What gives?
Right.
It's a larger situation than just the EPA, but it is sad to see that this watchdog agency that so many people are under the impression this is our first line of defense actually isn't.
Right.
The majority of the problems that we see are actually discovered by independent groups, nonprofit groups that go in there and do their own testing. So, as that pertains to hemp, obviously, all of these studies that I talk about in the book, they've all been published in independent academic journals and peer-reviewed journals, and they're not really taken into account by the EPA for environmental purposes, which is just very strange. They're only now starting to. It might also have something to do with the fact that the 2018 Farm Bill was, obviously just passed, but they just started to fund a research opportunity through the California through a California university to look at hempcrete
Right.
as an alternative to concrete. So that's really been the only time that I've been able to tell from researching the EPA's history where they've looked at hemp and said, okay, maybe we can use this for something.
Right. And you would think if they were actually doing the job that everyone thinks they're doing, they would have been on board with hemp a long time ago. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they would be the biggest advocate for it,
Right,
I
right.
mean, they would be the ones trying to change everyone's mind,
Yeah.
if they really were part of the scientific community. But
Okay, so we talked about the health aspects of hemp and a little bit about the environment. Let's talk about climate change. How do we harness this plant and this industry to tackle the impending climate crisis?
right. So, we talked a little bit about how hemp takes pollution out of the ground, contaminants out of the ground as it grows. Um, so, technically, if there's a place that is, contaminated with toxins, that's one way in which we can do it. Hemp, just as it grows, it actually absorbs more carbon than most plants. It actually absorbs more than any other agricultural crop. So there are, people that have been looking at the idea of carbon farming
Mm-hmm.
or creating a carbon sink, and hemp would be a perfect plant to do that with. And when you also look at the way in which hemp products are made, the product is essentially carbon neutral due to the fact of how much oxygen it produces.
Mm-hmm.
So when you just look at it that way, just by incorporating hemp into something like, for instance, car manufacturers are using it using hemp plastic to
Mm-hmm.
line doors instead of using, carbon fiber, because it's a more environmentally friendly way of producing it. So just when you look at, making those little changes, they add up to be pretty big.
Right. You mentioned in your book, actually a guest that we had on this show last fall, Bruce Dietzen, the guy from Renew Sports Car, and his whole concept
Right.
of carbon negative. If we grow enough hemp and make everything out of hemp and other plants, you can actually lock up all of that carbon that would otherwise be in the atmosphere, and we can get to a carbon negative environment.
Right.
Which is
Right.
fascinating.
And his car is just fascinating to me. I mean, it's just awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do quote from him in the book, and it's just so interesting because when you look at what Ford wrote and what the first car manufacturers wrote
Mm-hmm.
about the manufacturing process, they were really concerned about trying their best to make things that were more biodegradable, they were more attached to plants than chemicals,
Mm-hmm.
because they realized once this thing is really taking off, what are we going to do when we run out of this, or
Right.
when this becomes too polluted? So they even when you look way back when the first couple of cars were coming out, these concerns were there. It's really interesting now that people like him are starting to figure out how to actually do that.
So are there any of hemp's many uses that completely caught you off guard, totally surprised you?
I mean, I just feel like at this point it can do anything with the amount of research that I've looked into. I mean, I mentioned in here that you can make 3D printing filament out of it. So that's another. I mean, just printers in general. That's
Mm-hmm.
a huge waste problem that we have. The fact that you can make plastics out of it, biodegradable plastics. I love seeing how Hempcrete houses are. I think that really was interesting to me too, because obviously not only is the structure better for the environment, you're not using chemicals the same way, but it also like kind of self-regulates like the temperature inside the house,
Mm-hmm.
which was really interesting to me because of the way that it absorbs. Um, yeah, I mean, I just find the plant overall just fascinating because, we know about all these uses for, making rope and clothing and paper and so on. But I just feel like as science improves, we're just going to find more and more uses for it.
Right.
And it's just going to come to a point where, you couldn't even imagine its capabilities.
Yeah, the thing for me that sort of blows my mind is the idea of building
Oh
supercapacitors from
yeah.
the bast fibers.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
let's do
And
that. Right.
exactly. And when you think about too, we are going, fortunately, in a greener direction, but a lot of the components that we make this technology out of aren't necessarily green either.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, I have an electric car. I love it, but I didn't really realize. You know how the components of it, like the lithium for the battery, for instance,
Right.
mining that out of the ground is not at all as eco-friendly, particularly as far as where we get it from, and that the regulations in those countries is not up to our standard. Some places even use like child labor to go into the mines to get this
Right.
stuff. So, I think in general, we have a problem figuring out holistically how to deal with the problem. We're
Right.
getting off fossil fuels, but we're creating this other problem in another region of the world, which could be potentially just as bad.
Right.
So, and the fact that hemp could make some of those components, is really fascinating.
Yeah. You mentioned the word holistic. I think about this industry, it's sort of, we're starting it from the ground up, and we have a chance to sort of build these systems from, to the seed all the way to end product and reuse. And it's exciting that we could actually put some more, forethought into these systems and, tackle our, like you said, holistically, just everything together.
Yeah, I mean there are companies too. I mean, like the people that get the biomass for the hemp plastic. A lot of that comes from the waste.
Right.
If you're farming hemp for CBD, you don't necessarily need the entire plant. You don't need the stalk and everything. So these companies will buy that from you, and then they'll make plastic out of it. And so it's like this. And now that the Farm Bill has taken off, any regulation from interstate commerce laws, you could have someone in Colorado making CBD and then send the rest of the plant over to, a factory in another state, and then they can make whatever they want out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, we'll probably see a lot more of that.
Right. I'm involved. I've been covering a coalition here in Pennsylvania. It's a local supply chain coalition for hemp.
Mm-hmm.
And at one of the meetings, they were talking about how, because hemp is so light, is sort of in mass, that the further you have to transport it, the less sort of environmentally friendly and economical it is. So there's talk of, the local supply chains and having, the processing centers close to where the hemp is. How, from your perspective, how important are local supply chains?
I mean, it would be great to see local supply chains. It really would, because, when you really look at our industry, we don't really make anything that way anymore,
Right.
Aside from marijuana. That's the only other, I mean, when you really think about it, the marijuana industry is self-contained. Everything is made right there in the state locally. So it impacts the entire economic system of, you're looking at a local town or a local city.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be awesome to see that develop with the hemp industry as well, to really make it completely domestic and to have, because you really think about it, there hasn't been a new industry. Other than the internet, really, and this is something that you don't have to go to Silicon Valley to be a part of.
Right.
It can affect the rural communities where it's very difficult to find jobs for like unless you want to be in a specific agricultural field.
Mm-hmm.
It would be really cool to see that, because obviously we have the land, we have the space for it,
Right.
and there's just people really interested in this particular industry because of the potential it has with especially with CBD,
Yeah.
but just the potential that it has.
Right. In your chapter about building with hemp, you start by telling the story of the California wildfires and how your family had moved out of the area just a few months before that devastation occurred. So how do those fires relate to hemp as a construction material?
California in particular is a state where it's just the cost of housing and the cost of everything related with housing is it's just astronomically high. And when we were looking at buying a house, it was like, a hardcore fixer upper was like 450, you know, and
Whoa.
I mean, like, it needed work. So between that, your electrical bills are through the roof, and just overall in general, it's tough to buy a home. And then when you look at that particular area, where when you look at like the town of Paradise, where it's basically the entire town was destroyed by the fire, obviously these people consider that their home, but are they really going to be able to rebuild their lives there? Like logistically, because so far that hasn't really been the case. So, when you look into Hempcrete and how quickly hemp matures, like 180 days, you have a full crop, and how frequently, especially in California, where you could, where the weather conditions are pretty good for, growing more or less all year round, you could really come up with enough hemp to, in a very short period of time to make enough hempcrete to start that process and to start it locally and to really, make that, and also, they've done tests with hempcrete buildings to show that they're fire resistant. There's areas in Canada that are affected by wildfires, and they're looking at, just introducing that as the building material. And then another thing I didn't mention in the book, but I found fascinating, was the health of firefighters. That they go in there and they have to obviously get pretty close to these fires, and although they have better equipment now, the amount of toxins in our building materials does not offset that. So you're seeing a lot more people that have, cancer and different conditions, breathing conditions, due to the fact that they're just exposed to, insane amounts of formaldehyde, because that's in all of the MDF and veneer wood and basically everything that's in your house. So, that would make a huge difference as well.
In that same chapter, there's a detail I love that I didn't know about, that archaeologists have discovered that in the Great Wall of China, the Pantheon in Rome, and the Egyptian pyramids all contain hempcrete. Who knew?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
You know what else is fascinating? That the wall in China, the mortar that they use sticky rice.
Oh, wow.
To build it. Yeah.
That's funny.
Which I didn't know either. It's fascinating that, some of the oldest structures that we have, these ancient structures that just aren't going to go anywhere, they were made with these materials.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Another great detail in that chapter, where you estimate that an acre of hemp can build a 1,500 square foot home. That's great. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really, it's really interesting because we do have some hemp homes in the United States, but obviously, it wasn't easy to get these materials. It cost more to get them. You had to go and, find people that were familiar with it. And now, obviously that cost will go down, and it'll be, much easier to make that as choice as a homeowner, or a developer.
Right.
Once the industry gets bigger.
Yeah. And what you're using for the hempcrete is the hemp herds. So that's actually a byproduct, from the fiber part of the plant.
Right.
Or, from the CBD. So it seems like there's just so many possibilities.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that was always kind of considered a waste product. A lot of people really didn't know what to do with it. There's means to make paper out of it as well.
Yeah.
And it's just, you could just use it for also absorbent means. There's, I forget which country it is, but they actually make fire starters out of hemp curds instead of using, wood or some other chemical.
Okay. All right. So you call hemp a disruptor, something that will replace industries, and then there's this fear that it's like a threat for these industries. But then you say that the perception isn't totally accurate because hemp is being embraced by certain industries that it could possibly replace. Can you explain that a little better than I just did?
Sure. So in the book, I put two articles that were written in the 1930s. One in Popular Mechanics, and it basically says that it says, it can do all these amazing things, and the industry itself, once we get into it, it's going to make all these people all this money, and a lot of corporations at the time took a look at it and said, well, this is in direct competition to what I'm doing. So, we don't want this. And they lobbied against it. And obviously that played a role in the Marijuana Tax Act.
Mm-hmm.
And, now what we're seeing is all these industries, like we're just getting to the point in our country in particular where everything is merging with everything, like everything's getting maxed out.
Mm.
These corporations are, as consumers, obviously we just keep getting taxed and everything keeps rising because they're like, well, we've put it out. Like there's nothing else, it is what it is. We merge and there's only so many times you can merge, I guess.
Yeah.
And when you look at hemp, I think that's really for a lot of these big corporations, they're really looking at it as another path to make money, obviously, right? So you're seeing like large corporations like Coca-Cola looking into, CBD infused drinks. They would love to do that. Beer companies like Heineken, they already have I think it's a CBD and THC infused beer that they sell in some places in California. So it's getting to the point where, I think it's very interesting because it's gone the complete opposite direction where industries are saying, okay, we want this. And they might end up, essentially lobbying on, behalf of getting it in all of the, because obviously the FDA hasn't come out and said that, CBD infused foods and drinks are, technically legal at this realm.
Right.
I just find it interesting that, when you look at even the pharmaceutical industry, everyone thought that they would be, the number one advocate against legalization. They just have this new drug that was approved, Epidiolex, that has CBD in it. So, I think that there's, room at the table. If you look at, for instance, beer, and I make this comparison in Jesse Ventura's Marijuana Manifesto. If you look at, beer, you're always going to have Budweiser, right? But then you're going to have all these little craft beers and microbreweries and, other options. And I feel like that's really what you're going to see here. There'll be, big giant corporations that are going to use it in their ways. And then there's going to be all these other, smaller industries that'll come up with some fascinating ways to use it.
What can regular people do to hasten hemp's sort of, arrival or place in the world of consumerism?
Well, I think the number one thing you can do on a local level, is really kind of pay attention to your local laws because, right now a lot of things are in flux. A lot was left up to the states. So in some states, there's, issues where hemp isn't completely legal yet. And, that comes down to, again, the advocacy level. If you really want in your state, push your local representatives. And then, obviously, of course, kind of pay attention as much as you can to what's going on a national level, too. I mean, the FDA, I think it was May 31st, they had their first public hearing on CBD. and that really didn't amount to very much yet. But, you kind of have to continue on with the, just keeping informed. And I know that's hard to do. One of the ways that I do it is like I subscribe to some newsletters, with different hemp websites that kind of lay out, this is what happened in the week.
Right.
But one thing also is that there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what hemp is, what CBD is, and it gets kind of confusing for people. So this is the type of issue where you could share something on social media and it could be effective, just saying like, hey, this article is really interesting and it's actually, very accurate in some aspect of hemp, that could really open someone's eyes to the benefits of it.
Right.
Some people might not know that it takes toxins out of the soil. Some people might not know that you can make plastics out of it, or you can make 3D, filament out of it, and then when you really see the wide range of, how great this plant is, those people are going to become supporters as well.
Right. How about advice for farmers? How can they avoid getting the short end of the stick as this hemp industry develops?
That's a tough question. That's a really tough question because some of them really are. When you look at South Dakota, they still have it categorized the same as marijuana. They can't even grow it in that state right now. If you look at the history of it, it's always just been an advocacy effort. If you look at organizations like, it was Vote Hemp was involved in a lot of the legislation and fighting, for legalization of hemp, educating, legislatures. I know there are a lot of, farm groups that farmers, are like associations that they're involved in.
Mm-hmm.
And, in South Dakota in particular, I know that they went and went into the legislature and tried to educate them. They gave them kind of like a talk about all of the things it can do. And I know also what has been effective is bringing, legislatures, local representatives to the farm and showing them what it does. And, I think visually, obviously they see, okay, it's really not the same as marijuana, because there is that perception.
Sure.
And it's crazy that it still exists. There is this farm in upstate New York that they're growing hemp for, organic hemp for food purposes. And they would bring, the local reps up there and give them a tour and explain, the whole process and show them the facility. And I feel that something like that is really helpful because, everyone's a visual learner. And once you're there, you really see the impact it can make, right, especially on a local level.
So the foreword to your book, as you mentioned before, is written by former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura, with whom you wrote the book, his Marijuana Manifesto. So in his foreword, he's pretty cynical about the reason why politicians are suddenly getting on board with hemp, mm-hmm. and it's all about money. Do you think money should really be the motivating factor in the hemp industry, or is there a way to change the value system?
I think people that are in the hemp industry, as far as farming goes, are, those are really the advocates. Those are the people that believe in it. They're the people that want to see change. The company that I mentioned in the book that produces plastic from hemp, that company wasn't, the guy, he wasn't founding the company to, make a lot of money. He was mm-hmm. looking at it as, okay, we have a plastic problem. How do we fix the plastic problem? And that's really, I think, what gets a lot of the advocates into it, is they realize this can really solve a lot of problems. And unfortunately, we are a capitalistic society, so there is always going to be that, monetary aspect of it. And, obviously we see that with the marijuana industry in particular. I feel like that there will always be advocates looking to, because, any way you look at it, hemp is changing the planet and in a positive way. So you just, even if you're looking at it as purely from a, capitalistic standpoint, you're still doing some good. So, I mean, I guess that's a positive takeaway. So even if these politicians are, looking at, okay, how much money can I make off of this potentially, they're still, at some level still doing some good.
Jen Hobbs, author of American Hemp, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Eric. It was great.
Okay, you can find the book American Hemp online wherever you buy books, probably Amazon. I will have a link to Jen's blog on our website at lancasterfarming.com. And a few other things for you to think about. The first is the local supply chain. If you are a grower or a processor here in the great state of Pennsylvania and you want to get involved in growing a strong local supply chain, you want to check out proudpennsylvania.org. Look for the Local Supply Chain Coalition. Okay, the other thing is autoflower. I've had some interesting conversations with some plant breeders in the past couple of weeks about this amazing thing called autoflower. What's that? I don't know. You're going to have to wait until the fall to find out, I think. And speaking of the fall, I'm happy to announce that Lancaster Farming newspaper, in conjunction with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, will be hosting an industrial hemp summit in October, the 7th and 8th in Lancaster City, Lancaster County. More details about that in future episodes. Yeah, that about does it for me. I am Eric Herlock, digital editor at Lancaster Farming newspaper. Be sure to check us out on the Instagram at LF Podcast Hemp and also online at lancasterfarming.com. You can always reach me by email, podcast@lancasterfarming.com. While you're on the website, subscribe to the newspaper. You will love it. lancasterfarming.com/podcast deal. Otherwise, I hope you have a great 4th of July, and remember, watch your fingers. All right, I'll see you in the newspaper. This episode of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2019 by Lancaster Farming. Lancaster Farming is part of the Steinman Communications family. This episode was written and recorded, edited and produced by Eric Herlock. The music is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow, except for the very opening piece, which was the Star Spangled Banner, performed by Sousa's Band, recorded in New York, 1898, courtesy of the Library of Congress. Thank you.
Industrial hemp. Industrial hemp. Industrial hemp. Industrial hemp.